So basically we're a year into this winter project I embarked on last year called Operation Oceana, and I thought I'd do a quick video that give you kind of an overview of what's going on, sort of behind the scenes, I guess you could say. This is everything underneath the tank. So we'll start with the very first thing. This is kind of important. This is the reverse osmosis deionized water system, also known as RO water. It's connected directly into the plumbing because there's a bathroom on this adjacent wall. So the water comes in there, it filters through a 4-stage filtration system, and there's a series of connectors and on and off switches. You can see a couple of them right there. And when I need to fill some of these reservoirs, we'll get here to in a second, I just turn those on and fill those up. So we've got a couple other supplies underneath there, and then we've got our supply of ocean salt that we add to the water. Got a couple of storage bins there. In this first reservoir, this one is a 5-gallon reservoir tank, and this is fresh water. And what we do is, when it needs to be filled, I'll try to keep it pretty close to full. As I turn the levers on, there's one on the basically the ceiling of the underneath area here, and I turn it on and it feeds water through the filtration system and into this tank. And the purpose of that fresh water is to top off any water that's lost through evaporation. And the reason that we top it off with fresh water is because it concentrates the salt in the water as it evaporates. So we want to keep that salt consistency an even amount. So there's a pump in there, and you can see in the very bottom, and I'll tell you where that goes to here in just a second. Let's move on over to a couple other things here. We've got a UPS backup system so that if we were to lose power, there's about 7 seconds between when the generator comes on and when the power goes off. So in order to keep the sump pump pumping water and not causing any type of overflow, that battery backup will keep that pump going, and also the power heads for a period of time, just briefly, for that to happen. If it didn't have that, the water levels would adjust very quickly, even in that 7 seconds. So, and then you can see this is a 15-gallon saltwater reservoir, and I fill this the same way. There's some levers that have some hoses that feed directly in here from the RO water system. I fill this about once a week. It takes about 6 to 7 hours to fill it as the water goes through the filtration system. This is where I mix the salt water to do water changes, and we do those about 5 gallons at a time every other day. You can see the levels on there, and I'll tell you in just a second how that actually happens. So, but you can see, if I kind of zoom in here a little bit, that little faucet, I guess you could say, is what pumps water from that reservoir into the sump area, and that's how I get the fresh water into there for the water changes. So let's move over to the sump for a second here. We have got our skimmer and our phosphan reactor, which is not actually turned on at the moment. We've got a little something going on. We'll get that back going pretty soon. But there's a heater there in the sump. You can see, like, kind of right there, that little red thing at the top is the top of the heater where I adjust the temperature. And then, of course, the skimmer. So there's a series of pumps here. There's one that actually, there's a big one. It's kind of the back, down in there. That's the one that pumps water from the sump back into the tank, out of that little valve right there, and water comes down into the sump, a little reflection there, from this overflow box right here, and it goes down. It uses a vacuum to actually pull water down to there. It goes through that filtration. There's some biomedia down there. It goes through and ends up over here. So in order to do a water change from the saltwater reservoir, I have an app that's connected to, let's see back here if we get to that Hydros device controller right back there. I have an app where there's a button where I can turn on what we call the sump pump, and there's a pump that you can't really see down in there that pumps water directly out of the sump area into the plumbing, just to the drain area, again to the bathroom and behind that wall back there. So it pulls water out of the tank, and then I turn on the pump that with another button on the app, basically, that pumps water from this saltwater reservoir out that little outlet right there, and it goes directly into the sump. So that's kind of how the water changes happen. Back to the freshwater thing, you can see there's a little, maybe get to there, that black hose right there, that is coming from the freshwater tank, and it is putting water in the sump area. Now in this area over here, there is a sensor that senses when a certain amount of water has evaporated, and it's connected to this device right here. And when it senses that water's at a certain level, that's when it kicks on the pump that's in the front 5-gallon freshwater reservoir and automatically comes into the sump through that guy right back there. So it's kind of a fairly complex system, but the idea was to design it so that I didn't have to haul around 5-gallon water jugs. I could do water changes with ease. The whole idea of tying it directly into the plumbing came from just a plumber I had here on site that does a lot of my plumbing, and he was replacing a hot water heater, and he saw this work we were doing on the tank, and he's like, well, why don't you let me plumb that for you? We can tie it directly into the plumbing right within that wall right behind the tank. So that's what we did. So that's kind of how the sort of complex system works, but it makes it really easy for me to maintain. So we've also got a couple of remote controls here that are just on the inside of the door. One of them controls the LED lightings underneath the tank, so I can see everything going on. Those are not on unless I'm doing maintenance under there. And then this other one is actually pretty cool. This controls the LED lightings and also the power heads. See, we've got one on each end of the tank, and I can set all the various percentages of how strong I want them to be. I have it set to where they do what's called a surge, which is a more natural water flow in the tank. It'll kind of kick on and surge kind of the flow, and then it will pause for a moment. And so sometimes you can see the fish when they get caught up in it. I don't know if I can catch one of them here. When they swim in front of there, it'll kind of shoot them into that flow a little bit. So it's pretty fun to watch, among the other things that are super fun to watch in the tank. So anyway, I think that's a pretty good high-level overview. There's a couple other things going on in there. We've obviously got a couple power strips back there. I can turn each one on and off individually. They're all labeled. We got some shelves, UPS. I've got some storage supplies or some seaweed storage. And then of course the salt and a couple other, we've got some extra socks so we can change those out while we clean the others. So anyway, that's Operation Oceana.